The most uncomfortable experience I had at the bus stop happened one evening when I was waiting on the second bus to take me home from school. I stood at a bus stop on a busy main road in front of a gas station. The street was pretty lively at that time of day. The first bus was delayed due to having to load a wheelchair user on, so I missed the second bus by 5 minutes and had to wait about 35 minutes for the next one to show up. I waited there patiently after visiting the gas station for a soda and snacks. A short, thin, older man wearing all black walked by me mumbling to himself. I ignored it until he doubled back again, getting closer to me. He continued mumbling to himself, becoming louder and louder, sometimes laughing and sometimes becoming angry. I quickly understood that he wasn't mentally stable and moved a bit away. The man followed me to my new spot and continued his insane rambling. I started getting nervous. He started yelling and arguing with himself, so I nervously moved to another spot, keeping my eye on him. He followed me again, still mumbling nonsense, more laughter. Then he started screaming out angrily. He started circling me like a shark, walking faster and faster. My nervousness turned into fear. I tried moving again, and he followed me again and continued circling me. He started loudly arguing with himself and occasionally yelled out nonsense. Honestly, I was afraid the voices in his head might tell him to throw me in front of a car or something. I started sweating and bolted for the gas station, bad knees and all. Inside the gas station, I looked out the door, and the man was still at the bus stop, pacing back and forth, mumbling. I didn't feel safe going back out there. I tried calling my best friend, but he didn't answer, so I called a church friend and asked if she could pick me up. She told me she was at work and wouldn't be off for over an hour, and her job was a distance from where I was. I would have to wait a long time. She sent me an Uber code that made my first ride free. I downloaded the app and waited inside the gas station until my Uber showed up. I started taking Uber and Lyft to and from school after that. It was expensive, but my parents insisted on it for safety. Eventually, we moved a few blocks away from my university. When I was earning my undergrad degree in university, I didn't have transportation, so I had to take public transportation. Due to this, I experienced many uncomfortable situations that made me a faithful user of Uber and Lyft. One such situation happened my second semester in school. I lived pretty far away and had to take 2 different buses. One bus dropped me off in a sketchy area near a gas station, where I would wait for around 15 minutes for the next bus, which would drop me off across the street from my university. The first few times went okay. I was joined by a bunch of middle school children waiting for their school bus a few feet away. They were always lively, and the school bus would show up within 5 to 7 minutes of them being out there. An older gentleman would catch the bus with me on occasion as well, and would stand there quietly. After a while, I started noticing a young man watching me down the street. He lived in a pretty run-down house and would peek his head out the door and just watch me at the bus stop. He never approached, but just watched. This went on for some days until one day when the children were already gone and the older gentleman didn't show up. The young man walked towards me slowly. He still watched me silently. My heart was racing as he approached me. He passed by me, still glaring before turning around, still staring and walking back towards his home. I was confused and concerned. He did this multiple times for about 2 weeks, each time getting closer and closer to me without saying anything, just staring. Finally, I decided to just speak to him. I said, "Hey, I see you all the time. Would you be interested in coming to my church?" I handed him a small card with my church's address and phone number on it. He took it and looked at it and said to me, "I'm not a bad person." I told him I didn't say he was. I was just inviting him to church. He said he didn't have transportation on Sundays. I told him someone would pick him up. He said okay and asked a bunch of other questions. I guess church scared him off because he didn't show up again. I had always hated working the night shift, but the extra pay made it worth it, or so I told myself. Tonight felt different, though. The rain tapped against the windows of the bus like nervous fingers, and the streetlights blurred into long streaks of gold. I sank into my seat, letting my head rest against the cool glass, counting the minutes until I'd be home. That's when I noticed him. He was sitting 3 rows ahead, but his body was turned toward me. At first, I thought he was just zoning out, like most people did on late-night buses. But then I noticed his eyes. He wasn't just looking, he was watching. I swallowed hard and looked away, pretending not to notice. My reflection in the window stared back at me, wide-eyed and uneasy. The bus rattled along, stop after stop, and he never got off. I kept hoping he'd stand up, push through the doors, and disappear into the night. But he didn't. When my stop finally arrived, my heart raced. I waited until the last possible moment, then bolted out the doors. The rain hit my face like icy needles, but I didn't stop. I just needed to get home. Half a block later, I made the mistake of glancing back. He was there, walking fast, too fast, his dark figure cutting through the rain like a shadow. My breath hitched. I picked up my pace. So did he. By the time I turned the corner, I was running. I never saw him coming when he grabbed me. One moment I was sprinting. The next I was on the ground between 2 parked cars, my back scraping against wet pavement. His hand clamped over my mouth before I could scream, and my heart felt like it would explode. Please, please don't, I begged as soon as he uncovered my mouth. His eyes were wild and he leaned in close. I was about to scream again when I heard another voice, a man's voice, shouting from above. Hey, what the hell are you doing? A man leaned out of a nearby apartment window, his voice sharp and angry. My attacker froze for half a second before jumping up and sprinting down the street. I was still screaming when a police car turned the corner. The flashing lights lit up the street as the officers jumped out and ran after him. I sat there, shaking, barely able to process what had just happened. Later at the station, they told me who he was, a convicted rapist just released from prison and on probation. My stomach churned. I couldn't believe how close I had come to being another headline. To this day, I can't take the bus without looking over my shoulder. I keep pepper spray in my purse and never wear headphones when I'm walking alone. I survived that night, but part of me stayed there, in the rain, between those cars, begging to be let go. I had stayed late on campus again, cramming for an exam in the library. It wasn't unusual for me to take the last bus home, so I didn't think twice when I stepped off at my stop that night. The streetlights flickered and the sidewalks were empty, except for a single figure sitting on the bus stop bench. It was an older woman, wrapped in layers of tattered clothes, surrounded by plastic bags. She rocked slightly, muttering under her breath, but looked up as I passed. "Spare some change, young man," she rasped. I hesitated, but my mom always told me to help when I could. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a crumpled dollar bill, and handed it to her. "Thank you," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "Not many kind boys like you." I nodded awkwardly and turned to leave. She said something else, but I couldn't make it out. Her voice sent a chill up my spine, and I quickened my pace, anxious to get home. Once inside my apartment, I locked the door, showered, and tried to shake the unsettling feeling. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just a harmless old woman. I turned off the lights and crawled into bed. I was finally starting to relax when I heard, "Yo, woo!" It was faint but unmistakable. My heart pounded as I sat up, straining to listen. "You woo!" I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. My stomach dropped. She was there, the bag lady, standing under the streetlight looking up at my window. Her lips were curled into a crooked smile. I stumbled back, heart racing. She couldn't know where I lived. Could she? I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling until exhaustion finally overtook me. When I woke up the next morning, I convinced myself it had to be a bad dream. But as I opened my front door to leave for class, I froze. There, sitting on the stoop, was a filthy, one-eyed teddy bear. A note pinned to its chest read, "For my kind boy, I'll see you soon." I slammed the door shut and called the police. They said they'd patrol the area, but I knew they wouldn't find her. And I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd be back.